It's time for the Phil Ferguson Show.
This is Phil Ferguson, and you are listening to The Phil Ferguson Show. This is show number 251, and I want to do a little follow-up on last week's episode with Acorns. I received a lot of email about that episode, and thank you everyone for being so wonderful and so polite about it. I appreciate that very much. One of the concerns some people had was that they had either emailed or called Acorns and been told that there is not a fee to close their account. So I think it's important that I make a clarification, maybe even a correction on my part. What I was reading from in the program agreement from Acorns, and a lot of investments you can do exactly what I did, is you go to their website, they almost always have legal or disclaimers or program agreement. In this case, I had to go to the legal page, and then from the legal page, I could find the program agreement. And it's kind of like, at some point when you sign up, it says, check this box to say that you've read and agreed to the terms and conditions. This is what you're agreeing to. It's very lengthy. It's got a lot of detail and a lot of complications. So I was under the assumption that if you're investing in Acorns, you're doing it for the long term. And so in that program agreement, it very clearly articulates that there is a $50 per fee or per ETF fee to transfer your money. It is not clear that you pay $50 if you close the account and have them send you the money. So they may be technically correct. There's not a fee to close your account. But if you want your investments to go somewhere else, there will be a $50 per ETF fee to transfer your funds, and that is very clearly written in the program agreement. Now, when it comes to just straight up selling, closing, liquidating your account and getting the cash, that's less clear to me, and maybe I just haven't read it in enough detail. It does specifically state the following here. I'll just read this to you. If you request to close your account, Acorns will initiate a sale instructing the custodian to sell all ETF shares in your Acorns account and to send the cash less any proportion of the wrap fee or other fees due to your funding source. I'm not sure what other fees due is exactly. So if you sell it, you may not pay that $50 per ETF transaction or transfer fee. That could be true. Matter of fact, I think it is true. However, if you have been investing for a couple of years and then want to liquidate everything and have them send you the cash, you will then have to pay tax on all of the growth. That is a concern to me. So, we have that. Another part here says that any other fees owed for irregular services, including paper delivery of documents, transfer of ETF shares, or physical delivery of ETF shares. It is really clear that you'll pay the $50 per ETF if you transfer, but I'm not sure about this paper delivery of documents thing, because at some point, because this is a taxable account, they're going to have to send you a 1099 or something. Now, maybe they continue to do that even if you close your account but keep the app. But if you don't have the app, or maybe because you close the account and maybe it's written somewhere else, that they'll charge you $15 for the statement and then $15 for another document fee. I'm not sure on that. But I've had a lot of people ask if it's still okay to use it. Well, yeah, if you want to. I don't see the point of it. But the other thing that a lot of people didn't really focus on, and I'm very concerned about the fact that the investments are not in your name. They are in Acorns' name. If Acorns goes bankrupt, What happens to your investment? I don't know the answer to that. I'm not very comfortable with that. And since there's wonderful options that you can do, and that leads to one of the other common questions I've gotten about this subject is, what should you do? So if you just want to save a few bucks at a time, if you need the money in a year or 2 or 3 or even 4 or 5, just put it in your bank. I know it's painfully simple, but you don't want it in the stock market. If you're saving up for a deposit on a car or a house, just put it in your bank. If you cannot resist spending it, create a separate account. At some point you have to be responsible for yourself. Now, if you want to invest in long term and you only have a few hundred or $1,000 or $2 and it's really for the long term, you should have it in an IRA or a Roth IRA, which Acorns doesn't even offer in the first place. So again, you shouldn't have the money there. So people said, what should we do? I hope that the last episode I talked about opening a mutual fund account or a brokerage account at Vanguard, Vanguard.com. And no, sadly, they don't pay me anything for saying their name almost every week. You go set up an account there. You can put in just a few dollars. You can open it and leave it zero for a while. Eventually, like most firms, they'll probably close it if there's no activity. And you can link your bank, and you can have your bank send $5, $10, $15 daily, weekly, monthly, whenever, just kind of like Acorns did. And it's going to be almost the exact same amount of work. And you can send that money to Vanguard. From $1,000 down to zero, you will have no investment options. But that's okay. It's less than $1,000. Is it suboptimal? Sure. But only having $1,000 is by itself suboptimal. Once you get to $1,000, you can use all of Vanguard target date funds. And they'll have names like target date 2020, 2025, 2050, 2055, 2060. I'm not sure exactly how far they currently go out, but you can pick your own level of aggressiveness by picking the date. If you pick the target date 2015, it's going to have a lot of bonds. So you're not going to be exposed to the stock market like you might be if you pick 2050, because it's assuming that you're going to retire in 30 plus years. So it's going to be almost all stock, maybe 5% bonds. So if you want next to no service, next to no advice, someone telling you what to do, I'd rather do it at Vanguard, where the account is in your name, where the assets there are owned in your name. It's a great big company that's been around for a long time. And there's just no problems. You're not paying the 0.25% management fee. You're going to pay what the fund charges, but you were paying that before in Acorns anyway. So it's kind of a no-brainer. Plus, if it's only $1,000 or $2,000 and that's all you have, you probably qualify for an IRA or a Roth IRA, and you can open up one of those and avoid taxes, even if you do make transactions with the account, unlike Acorns. So for me, Acorns is a no. I can't figure. The only reason you would want to use it is because it's cute and it looks cool and you can look at it on your phone. Well, if you set up an account at Vanguard, you can link to their website and you can look at your account there too. It's just not as pretty. So it's very clever. It's a marketing gimmick. It has a nice, pretty interface. But anything other than that, no. I'm just going to say no, don't use it. Use Vanguard. And so some people have said, well, what if I have more than $1,000? What should I do? And I haven't talked about this for a while, so I'm going to go over some ideas, and I'm going to do this whole disclaimer thing. This is not specific investment advice to anyone actually listening to the show. Please do not take this as specific investment advice. It is not. It is educational. Do your own research. Look into this. These are just some ideas of things that you could look at. And I will further clarify that this does not apply to people who are 12, 13 years or less from retirement or in retirement. I'm talking to the same people that are interested in Acorns, 20, 30, maybe 40-year-olds who only have a few $1,000s. So I'm going to give you some ideas that you can go research and look into for yourself to decide what's right for you. So once you get to $1,000, you can get one of half a dozen or maybe even 10 Vanguard target retirement funds. Look at them, see what the mix of stocks versus bonds and judge for yourself what kind of risk tolerance you want to take. If it's all you have and you can qualify for an IRA or a Roth IRA, put it in one of those kinds of accounts. Once you get to $3,000, you can switch to the Vanguard Total Stock Market Index. Some disadvantages with this. One, you won't have exposure to any bonds. You won't have any exposure to international or real estate or a whole bunch of other categories. It will be 100% total U.S. stock market. The reason I switched to this at $3,000 is because if you only have $3,000, and again, you're not near retirement, you need the maximum long-term growth, and that's what this fund is likely going to give you. And just to be clear, the symbol for that is VTSMX. It's nice because it needs $3,000, the expenses are low, and you are going to be diversified across the entire United States stock market. Once you get to $10,000, you may be able to switch to the Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund Admiral shares. So the Admiral is considered a different class from the investor shares. The expense ratio is a little bit lower, but don't focus on that too much because we're getting to the point where we're splitting hairs and you can focus too much on one thing and not something else that's more important, like the fact that you need to save more money. But that is VTSAX. Again, if you're in an IRA or a Roth IRA, you can sell the one fund and buy the other fund and cut your expenses for next to nothing or for one small transaction fee, depending on where your account is held. If you are in a taxable account and it took you a couple years to get to $10,000, doing that may create a couple of $100 or more in a tax liability. So you don't want to create a $1,000 tax bill to save 0.06% on your annual expense ratio. So keep that in mind. When you get to $50,000, I'm going to suggest breaking it up a little bit. And this is where you can get a little more diversification. You can have a little bit more choices in your investments because a lot of the index funds, a lot of the Admiral shares are $10,000 or more for some of the bond ones to actually get into the lower expense ratios. And of course, at the risk of being redundant, these are just some ideas for you to look into and check it out. But if you have $50,000, you could put 10% into the Vanguard REIT, real estate fund. They've actually changed it. It's no longer just REITs, but it's real estate, which includes a lot of REITs, but a few other things that are not REITs. I think that's an improvement that Vanguard recently made, a little more diversification for you as the investor. Because 10% of $50,000 is only $5,000, you will not be able to get the Admiral shares, which require $10,000, but you get the diversification. I then put 20% in international, and that might be the VGTSX, 25% in the Vanguard Extended Market, 25% in the Vanguard Extended Market, VEXAX, and the remaining amount, 45%, almost half of your money would go in the Vanguard S&P 500 Index, VFIAX. So that is a way to have large cap and small cap, international and real estate. It's not as much as I might do with someone that has 3 or 4 or 800,000 where we might have 10 or 12 positions. And it definitely does not apply if you are a decade or less from retirement because you need to have some money in the cushion. And there's all kinds of different bonds. And we've talked about that even recently. But if you're looking for something to do with a few thousand or 10,000 or 50,000 or a little bit more, those are some ideas. Again, that is not necessarily correct for you. The other thing I want to talk about before we get to the interview with Ray-Smock, who is the former House historian for the United States Congress. Wonderfully interesting guy. We're going to talk about all kinds of things, including his new book about Donald Trump. It's kind of in a diary form, written day by day or a couple of days at a time, his impressions and thoughts about Donald Trump and what he was doing. So if you want the perspective of how fucked up Donald Trump is from a person who has spent probably 40 to 50 years, maybe 60 years, in politics, actually worked for Congress and knows a lot of history. He is a officially professional historian in his take on what Trump is doing versus what every other president ever has ever done. That's coming up in a few minutes in the interview. A couple other quick things that I wanted to talk about is some people had asked about 401k and given a little more information about some things that happen there. So the first topic is what happens if I move my money out of a 401k? If you've done this a whole bunch of times, you probably understand this, and I'm going to bore you for a minute or two, so forgive me. But if you've never moved a 401k, and of course, if you've changed jobs, 1 or 2 or 3 jobs, even if it's just one, my recommendation is you roll over the 401k into an IRA. Of course, if you have any questions about that, or you have a really big one and you're not sure what to do with it, you can email me, phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com. Please do not send any statements until we've at least talked. I don't want you to accidentally type the wrong email address and send some random person very important financial information. So when you want to do the rollover, you put it into an IRA. When that happens, you want to contact your former employer, and maybe the former employer has, a third-party person responsible for what they're supposed to do. And that could be the custodian, the person that holds your 401k. Could be Schwab or John Hancock, Merrill Lynch, whoever. But start with the employer. They'll probably give you a form to fill out, and that may be online, but it may be a PDF. They may require that you wait for them to mail it to you, which is really lame in today's age, but you got to do whatever it is they tell you to do. On that form, you have to put where the money is going to. So if you set up an account at Fidelity, you will have to put in the Fidelity account number. You'll have to put in the name of Fidelity and their address and their phone number, and you have to fill out whatever else they have on the form. Most of the time, most employers, this form is about a page. It's not complicated. However, I have seen occasions where people will get a 7, 8, or even a 10-page form, and it's almost as if it was designed to be confusing. If you get stuck with one of those, again, email me. Once you get the form sent in to the employer, they will usually stamp it or sign it, and they'll send it to the custodian, the person that is holding your 401k money for you, and they will then take action on it. What surprises people the first time that you do this is that you will get the check. I'm not 100% sure why it works this way. Maybe one of my wonderful listeners can tell us, but it's kind of always been this way, and I don't see it changing. So if your 401k is at Fidelity and you're moving the money to Schwab, and you gave your employer the account number and the name of Schwab, you would think that Fidelity would just send the money to Schwab. They will not. They will send a check to you, and here's the real big trick, is it will be made out to Charles Schwab, FBO, for the benefit of you. So if your name is John Smith, it'll say Charles Schwab, FBO, John Smith. Usually it'll come as a full-size sheet of paper, 8.5 by 11, and the bottom part where you can tear off is actually your check. You want to send the whole thing to, in this example, to Charles Schwab, and they will deposit it in the account. But I really recommend, please do make a photocopy, front and back if there's anything on the back, so that you can maintain that for your records. If I had to guess why it's sent to you before you send it to Schwab, is that if the amount is wrong, that's your one chance to correct it. So pay attention. If you have $400,000 in your account and they send you a check for $350,000, you better take a few minutes to figure out what is going on. Why is that number different than what you thought it was? It might be right, but you need to check, because I think once you send that check and it's deposited, if you go back to the old custodian and say, where's the rest of the money? They're going to go, what the fuck are you talking about? There is no rest of the money. So you get that check and you forward it. So that's kind of how you do a rollover from a 401k to an IRA. And the last thing really quick is a review. I've had a few emails ask about this. What is the order, the sequence that you put money away? So if you can't afford a whole lot and your employer has a 401k, you want to make sure you put in as much as necessary to get 100% of the free money from your employer. Free money is the best kind of money. I mean, if you make, I'll just use big round numbers, if you make $100,000 and you put 5% in and your employer matches 5%, they're giving you $5,000. You must collect that money, all of it. Find a way. You might say to yourself, I can't afford to save $5,000 because you have to save $5,000 to get the $5,000. Find a way, because it's 100% guaranteed risk-free return on your money. You put in 5, they put in 5. A lot of companies will do 50% of the first 6% up to 3% or some other weird thing just to make it stupid and complicated. I don't know why governments and companies do that, but they tend to do things like that. So you want to get all that free money. If you can then save more money for a calendar year, and we're going to say 2018 as an example, and again with the assumption that you're making 100,000, and yes, I know not everybody makes 100,000. You can scale it down or up if you're so inclined. You can save $5,500 in your IRA or Roth IRA if you qualify. If you are married, you are likely able to save that money in both of your accounts. So you go to the 401k to get all the free money. The next best thing is going into an IRA or Roth IRA where you can put $5,500 or $6,500 if you are 50 years of age or older. And the reason you want to do that is you have many more choices and you are not subject to your employer doing something stupid and switching your IRA, your 401k from something that might be good to something that becomes shitty. Now, of course, at this point, we are getting to a pretty big number. You have $5,000 that you put in your 401k, and in our theoretical scenario, a $5,000 match from your employer, and $5,500 for yourself, and maybe for your spouse. I can't talk. It's another $11,000. So we're pushing $21,000, which is 21% of your income. A lot of people can't do that. I do recommend 20% or more, but it's hard to do that at start. But you need to live your life that way, or you may never make it to retirement. 10%, my regular listeners know, and they're waiting for it, is the suck-ass minimum. 10% will work if you start when you're 22. If you're in your mid-30s, your mid-40s, probably not going to cut it. You're going to have to live on much less money in retirement, or you're going to be at risk of running out of money in retirement. So you have the free money, and then max out your IRA and Roth IRA. If you can still save more, go back to your 401k, and you can go up to, for 2018, $18,500 out of your paycheck. So that's $18,500 plus another $11,000. We're pushing $30,000 now. That's almost 30% of your pay. You're doing a wonderful job. If you have more money to save than that, and I do have some people that make, say, $100,000 and live on 50, and they want to save 50 grand a year, which is fantastic. You'll be able to retire much sooner than everybody else. Then you need to go to a taxable account, unless, like we talked about recently, you have an HSA where you may be able to save several $1,000s more there, or unless you have some kind of side business, consulting business, where you might have additional income that comes in the form of a 1099, you might be able to set up a SEP IRA or a solo IRA, which I've covered in detail in other shows. So that's the order of events for a 401k, some information about 401ks, wrap up on Acorns, and whew, it's time for a little fun, lighthearted break, and then we're going to talk about Donald Trump.
I think there'd be more atheists and less faithful if you weren't allowed to teach anything, you weren't allowed to mention any gods or any beliefs or atheism, right, until they were 20. I think we'd see a different pattern. The human brain, when it's young, is a sponge. It has to be. It has to take in all the information. It has to trust its parents, its elders, to survive. Without question, don't touch the fire. Why not? Don't go near the clock. Don't go near the wolf. Don't touch that spider with a red bit. Don't touch that. Why not? Just don't. There is a God. What? There is a God. And if you're bad, you go to hell. Okay? And if that's constantly confirmed, like all the other things, wolves eat you, black widows kill you, fires burn you, if it's given that same level of credence and truth, you're never going to get over it. It's going to be a lot harder to undo that. I think the myths came up, maybe, often as a stopgap to knowledge until we find out more. The Earth is flat, and no, we've proved now, okay, the Earth's not flat, we were wrong, okay? But that's not personal. You don't take that personally. It doesn't affect you. It doesn't affect your afterlife, And so they often want to hold on to that, right? But only because of the way they've been conditioned. We know it's fun to tell children there's a Santa Claus, and there's fairies at the bottom of the garden, and all these cute things. It's cute till they're 7 or 8. If they're 34, it's a bit embarrassing socially. This is my son. What's he doing? He's looking for fairies. Is he? Okay, we better leave. If you're born in India, you're probably a Hindu. If you're born in America, you're probably a Christian. If you're born in Pakistan, you're probably a Muslim. That's a coincidence, isn't it? That you're always born into the right God. Always. Isn't that lucky? I was born under the right God. All those others are going to hell. But I was born into the right religion. I'm going to heaven. It's strange that we hold on to these sort of medieval beliefs. Where did the universe come from? God made it. Which doesn't solve the problem for me. Because we straight away say, well, who made God? And if they say, well, he's always been around, well, let's just say the universe has then. Let's just cut out the middleman. It saves time.
All right, everybody, welcome back. This is Phil Ferguson, and of course, you are listening to the Phil Ferguson Show. With me today, I have ray-smock. How are you, sir?
I'm doing fine, great.
Well, of course, regular listeners know that you were on the show, probably a good year ago or so, and we talked about some fun stuff. But for people who are brand new, can you give us a little bit about your background? And I guess you might know some things about politics and the history of it. Fill us in a little bit.
Well, I'm the former historian of the U.S. House of Representatives, and I held that position for 12 years back in the 80s and mid-90s, and worked for 3 different speakers of the House of Representatives during the presidencies of Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, and part of Bill Clinton's term. And so I have been and I'm a historian of the Congress. I'm currently the director of the Robert C. Byrd Center for Congressional History and Education at Shepherd University, a small liberal arts college just outside of D.C., about an hour and a half. In fact, I'm sitting here in my office, and I can look out through the trees and see the same Potomac River that runs through the nation's capital.
Well, very nice. And so the House historian, what does that actually mean? What did you do?
I was hired primarily to plan for the 200th anniversary of the U.S. Constitution and the Congress, which was 1987 and 1989. 87 when the Constitution was written, 89 when the first Congress assembled, and to plan national events, publications, and related to that issue, and also to establish for the first time a history office for the House of Representatives, where a historian's eye would be used to I wasn't there to record what was going on every day. They have clerks and recorders and things like that, and a congressional record to do that sort of thing. But I was there to take a look at the 200 and some odd year history of the House, and also to do the biographical directory of Congress, which is this great big thick book. It was published as a book since before the Civil War, and I brought it online for the first time. And now you can find anything you want in the biographical directory just by searching it online. But it has 11,000 biographies of everybody that served in the House, and another 18 or 1900 biographies of all the people who served in the Senate. So we were there to flesh out the history that had been ignored for so many years, and to be a continuing office and of service to the members. We worked for the entire House. It was a nonpartisan office, and then in 1995, when Newt Gingrich became Speaker, even though he was one of my biggest supporters when I was House historian, he wanted his own person in that job, and so I was the first person he fired because I was part of the Speaker's office, and officially I served at the pleasure of the Speaker. So that ended my career there, and I went on to continue to work in the field of congressional history as a chief consultant to the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia, and then also Senator Byrd was looking to put his papers somewhere, and I helped establish this institution here at Shepherd University. It had to be in West Virginia, and he wanted it close to D.C., so this is where we are now, and we have his collections and all kinds of other resources on the Senate, U.S. Senate.
Sure. And not too long ago, when I gave a little speaking tour in the Northeast, I had the luxury of stopping by, and you gave me a tour. I hope it's not too secret of some of the archives. That was good fun.
No, that's not secret. It's open and available for research, and we've got scholars that come and use this material for all kinds of things.
Well, it's a fascinating thing, and you've been doing this a long time, trying to save and document history.
Yes, I'm no spring chicken anymore. I just turned 77, and I've been active in politics in one way or another, mostly as a scholar. But I cut my teeth on the Chicago politics, south side of Chicago, in the 1964 Lyndon Johnson Barry Goldwater election, where I worked as a assistant precinct captain and just got my feet wet as a young man, learning how politics works and seeing it firsthand. And I've been fascinated with it ever since, and I'm still at it, and I will be at it as long as I have breath.
Excellent. I do know that in the last few days, actually, before we're doing this recording, a new poll came out of the best and worst presidents of the United States of all time, and apparently collectively Trump finished on the bottom. Do you think that's fair, or should he be up somewhere near the top?
No, that's fair. My book that I wrote, it was published on the anniversary of his first year in office on January 20th. I said months ago that he is going to go down in history as the worst president ever. Now, usually we historians are supposed to be a little bit more circumspect, wait for the dust to settle on the records, wait till the whole term is over, analyze, look at the records. A lot of the records of the Trump administration will not be open for many years afterwards. A lot of it's sealed, and it takes a while. But in this case, this is such an unusual situation, and he is such a totally amateur and inept person to hold this office that I have no difficulty whatsoever. And I said it months ago, and then, as you point out, Phil, just a few days ago, in the New York Times and in other places, this official American Political Science Association poll that they do every year of presidents ranked Trump, and he comes out on the bottom of the list, moving James Buchanan up one notch. And they broke it down by party affiliation, too, which I thought was interesting. So the scholars who identified themselves as Democrats, and those that identified themselves as Republicans, and those who were independents, you could see how they voted. And naturally, the Republicans gave him a couple of more points. He was just a little ahead of Buchanan at the bottom of the list. And the independents had him not quite at the bottom, but very close. The Democrats had him at the bottom. But when you tallied their three scores up, it put him at the very bottom of the list.
Now, you're saying that even Republican or Republican-leaning scholars, as much as they could lean one direction or the other, still were quite negative on Donald Trump.
Absolutely, no question about it. And I have not seen a serious scholar or a serious student of our government, and I also have seen an awful lot of serious Republican observers of Congress that are absolutely shocked and disgusted with his behavior and his lack of performance and his inability to perform. Even longtime conservative columnists like George Will, he left the party. People like Joe Scarborough on MSNBC, who was a Republican and a Republican congressman from Florida for a number of years and identified with the Republican Party, he left the party. And you see books written by conservatives like David Frum, who has a new book out called Trumpocracy. I don't know why I'm plugging all these other books when I should be plugging my own.
We'll get to you. Don't worry.
I'm not. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
But Frum has written and he's a very thoughtful conservative. And then there's people like Steve Schmidt, who was John McCain's campaign director. And Steve had a terrible time with Sarah Palin when McCain picked Sarah Palin. He thought that was shocking. But Steve has been one of the most outspoken, very sane and very deliberate. He hasn't left the Republican Party. He's a solid mainline Republican, and he can't stand Donald Trump.
Yeah,
so
I know.
This is not just my opinion, or there's a growing consensus among. You would imagine that Democrats were shocked. I think the whole nation was shocked in some ways, even those who were so anti-Hillary that they were glad they would have glad to see a trained SEAL elected president rather than Hillary Clinton. I mean, there was that kind of animus against Hillary. I understand that.
Well, it was interesting, and of course, let me just throw out the title of your book, and we'll get more into it here in a few minutes. It's called the Trump Tsunami. I got two T's there, so I messed it up. Trump Tsunami. A question, I was discussing this with a friend, I think just a night or two ago, that in the long run, from a liberal perspective, meaning mine, not necessarily yours, so feel free to comment on that, if Hillary had won, it might have been a long-term detriment to the progress of the country, because the battles against her, the war waged on her would have gone on for 4 to 8 years and just completely ruined the liberal and the Democratic brand, deserved or not. But instead, we have Trump, who is so awful that he's ruining the Republican brand and possibly is going to allow Democrats to have the blue wave or convert an entire generation to Democrats and get some of their liberal policies achieved. Any thoughts on that?
Yes. Of course, we don't know what would have happened if Hillary had won, but you're right to assume that the Republican Party would not give up on her, and that they would, a Republican Congress would find constant ways to investigate her for various crimes, even though she has not been found guilty of any crime. And we're now finding out that even the "lock her up" slogan that General Flynn was using and that others were using is basically part of a Russian effort, and it was the same campaign that the Russians used in the Ukraine.
Yeah, I just saw that
against
myself.
A woman that was running against the Ukrainian dictator. So we're finding out that the Russians paid people to dress up like Hillary Clinton, put them put the character in a cage with a Hillary mask, and drive it around in parades and rallies, saying "lock her up, lock her up." That would have continued, I suppose, had Hillary been elected, and that would have been very divisive. Bill, I think that the real problem, regardless of which party got in this time, is that we're facing such serious hyper-partisanship where we have demonized politics to the point where propaganda and lies substitute for reality, and they substitute for good government and for our ability to compromise with one another. And this is the real tragedy.
Oh, I agree, and it's one of those things that I'm not sure how we fix it. I've said before, one of the nice things about the internet is you can find any information you want. Of course, one of the big problems with the internet is you can find any information that you want. So you can be a flat earther, and you can find people that agree with you, and you can go hang out with them and get stuck in a bubble and only exposed to the people that already agree with your crazy ideas. And if some outside entity gets involved and starts targeting people in that group, they can move big segments of the entire population along a path because people just don't have the ability to analyze the content that they're being fed.
That is a problem. We need better politicians in both parties, people who are more interested in governing and doing the people's business than in getting elected or getting big bucks from big donors. We do need that, but we also, and this is one of the things that I talk about in my book to some extent, is we need a better class of voters. We need voters who can see through the fog of propaganda, that can see through their own partisanship, and look around and see what needs to be done, and then say, these are issues that I want to support, and I want to see candidates who will follow these issues, and do so in a way that finds a more of a central path than extremism on the left or the right. There is extremism on both sides, obviously, but right now, and this is what a lot of scholars have determined, including a number of my friends who are, identify with the Republican Party, that right now the problem is not that the Democrats are partly bad and the Republicans are partly bad. It's the Republicans who are particularly bad at this moment in our history, not only because of Donald Trump being an amateur and totally unqualified president, but because we have such a dysfunctional Congress, and the Congress majority is the Republican Party. The Republican Party right now controls 34 or 35 of the state governments out of the 50 states. It also controls the entire federal government. And so if there's dysfunction around, I mean, they can keep pointing to Hillary or point to Obama, which Trump does all the time. But this is their government. And what we're seeing is dysfunction.
Yeah, so many thoughts, so many ideas. One I want to see if you have an opinion on. In your area, the state of Pennsylvania is going through some remapping issues. Are you familiar with that? Do you have thoughts on that topic?
Yes, I am. Well, in the case of after the 2010 census, the thing that's hard to talk about when you talk about redistricting and gerrymandering, after 2010, there was across the country, again, with so many state legislatures being Republican controlled, it's the states that determine the boundaries of each congressional district. That's not a federal process. I mean, although the federal courts have weighed in on these things on many occasions over the years. But in the case of after 2010, a number of states basically gerrymandered or redrew their districts in such a way that it was almost all Republicans, so that you would guarantee that a Republican would hold that seat. Pennsylvania used to be a largely Democratic seat, and of course, like a lot of the country, it has shifted Republican over recent years. But of the 18 delegates, 18 seats, 18 congressional seats in Pennsylvania, 14 of them are Republican now, and only 4 are Democrat. And the state court looked at that and said, this is outrageously partisan party politics that drew these districts, and it's illegal. We hereby, the court ordered the state to redraw those districts and do it before the May primary season in Pennsylvania. And the court said, if the state won't do it, we will redraw the districts ourselves. And then that went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court decided not to overturn or object to what the Pennsylvania court was doing. So now the court, they have redrawn their districts. And we don't know how that's going to play out in the actual election, but it's possible that in Pennsylvania, you would have a pickup of maybe as many as 4 to 5 seats on the Democratic side, which would mean in the end you would have 8 or 9 districts that would be Democrat and 8 or 9 or 10 that would be Republican. And that seems more like the real balance of the population of the state.
Yeah, that would be a much more accurate match. It's one of those things. I've looked at the old map, the Republican map, and the court-drawn map, and it's very, very obvious if you know anything about population distributions, roads, rivers, boundaries, county lines, that the Republican map was tortured, just absolutely brutally manipulated for the intent of getting votes and locking in seats, whereas the one made by the courts looks kind of like, you have a couple small areas in cities, and then you go out around that, and the further out and the lower the population, the bigger the size, and you kind of get them to be, as close to a square or a circle or a hexagon as possible, and it looks much, much nicer.
It is. And of course, in those big rural districts that are between Pennsylvania and Pittsburgh, those are mostly Republican seats, and they have been forever.
Right.
And so it's not. What they did, they didn't create a revolution when they redrew this map. They got back to political reality, and I thought that was very good. And I think that's a model. I don't know how many states are going to be able to do that. Other states have been challenged, of course, in some states with very little population, gerrymandering is not an issue. I mean, if you only have 1 or 2 members of Congress, it's not an issue. But anything, especially in the bigger states, that's where the real action is.
Yeah, and of course, even with the Senate, it gets to be difficult because you only have 2 members. But it's the House that's nuts.
That's the House, yeah, because it's the Senate. You have 2 senators regardless, and there's no senatorial districts. They're elected statewide. So it's only the House districts, so it's only the composition of the House that's affected by gerrymandering.
So let's talk about this book a little bit. Again, Trump Tsunami. You put it out on the 1-year anniversary of Trump's time in office. What inspired this? Where did this content come from? What was your logic behind this?
All right, this may be one of the strangest books in terms of its origins ever written. I didn't start out to write a book. That was never my intention. What this is a diary, and the subtitle of Trump Tsunami is A Historian's Diary of the Trump Campaign and His First Year in Office. When I started following, I started following Donald Trump back in the 1980s. But I started seriously following his campaign when he was up there with all the other Republican candidates, and then he won the nomination. And I started posting on Facebook. I have 500 or 600 Facebook friends. Some of them are dear friends. Some of them are scholars like myself. Others are just people who I only know on Facebook. And I started posting my observations about what was going on, almost on a day-to-day basis. And people encouraged me. They said, you put this in a nice context that I don't know much about the history, and I don't know how government works. And so please continue to do this. You're helping me. I got encouragement. And basically, I got a lot of likes and occasionally a heart or two on some of these entries that I was doing. And they started out, some of them were pretty short, and some of them got longer and longer. They became more like essays. Some of them I wrote on Facebook, and then they were picked up by the History News Network, and then from there they sometimes got as op-ed pieces in newspapers. And so I just kept it up. And then about halfway through this whole process, and just about the time he was going to be elected, I totaled up. I went back to my activity log on Facebook and discovered that I had more than 50,000 words. And then by the time the first anniversary came along, I had 85,000 words that I had written about Trump. Almost not every day, but as breaking news would happen, as one more new thing that would just shock me to pieces because no president had ever done or said something like this, I would write a piece, but I would always try to put it in historical context. I would always try to put it in the context of my understanding of government. When he started issuing all of his executive orders, well, my friends on Facebook would say, well, what is an executive order and what is he doing? And so I explained what executive orders were and things like that. So it is a diary. You can be read from cover to cover. It unfolds chronologically, or you can just dip into it anywhere. Each one of them has a title. You can see what I'm talking about pretty quickly, and most of them are serious. They're critical of Trump, but I try to be balance it with an understanding of how government works and how he doesn't know how it works. And then occasionally I do silly things too. Little short ditties. I could read you one if you'd like.
I'd love that. Please do so.
This isn't the most profound thing in the book, believe me, but it again, when I got up to do these or something would happen in the news, I would this is spontaneous, and if the book has any value, I think it tries to capture it. I didn't go back and change anything. I just let this flow, and all I did was correct typos and that sort of thing. But I didn't want to change it because I see this as sort of raw history. One of my friends, who was the former Senate historian of the Senate, said he thought it was like reading history as breaking news. That's the way he put it. I kind of like that, and that's the way the book.
Well, and it kind of almost makes it source material because it's contemporaneous.
It is source material, but it's also not. It will be a document of the time someday, maybe. Yeah. Even if it never sells a single book, hardly, it will still be a document of the times, and it'll be in some libraries and it'll be researched.
Well, I know it sold. I know it sold a few copies because I have one, but I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead and read your section, please.
Okay. This is back in June. This is just about the time of the Russian stuff was really breaking then. But I at that time I just wanted to write a short piece about Trump as a pathological liar, and I just didn't want to say Trump is a pathological liar and this is not good. So what I did was a little piece called Two Versions of the Cherry Tree Story. We all know the story of George Washington. It's a myth, of course, but it's a nice myth, and it showed that George Washington was honest and faithful and true, and that he could never tell a lie. At least that's what we tell school kids.
Right.
So the two versions of the Cherry Tree Story go like this. And first, this is George Washington speaking. Father, I cannot tell a lie. I chopped down the tree. period. Now, this is how I thought Donald Trump might answer that question. Father, I cannot tell a lie. Look at these small hands, too small to hold that big axe and chop down the tree. I merely picked up the axe to take it back to the tool shed. I saw Hillary Clinton break into the tool shed and steal the axe. She gave it to Barack Obama. I saw them both run off together. Father, we should launch an investigation to get to the bottom of this. I am sure I will be vindicated.
Well, that sounds like him.
Most of my entries are not that lighthearted, but I do think that captures something.
Well, I'll ruin the lighthearted moment, so listeners, enjoy that, embrace that for a few seconds, because I'm going to switch to some of the recent events that happened in Florida. And unfortunately, a former student, went into the school and unfortunately killed 17, 18 people. And Trump just, I think yesterday, had a listening session where he had people from multiple occurrences where someone has gone into a school and killed people. And he sat there and he listened, and I watched it. And the entire time, he's just sitting there smiling, nodding. He kind of had that look on his face like I have if I'm forced to go to church. Well, I don't really get forced now, but when I used to be forced to go to church, just sitting there kind of in a light pain, a small agony that I have to sit through this. And of course, he had the little note that he had to remind himself in writing that to say, I hear you. Is he sociopathic? Can he actually empathize with people? What do you think?
I think one of his ultimate failures as anybody that's in politics, and he's never been in politics, he has no empathy whatsoever. He simply, if he's not the center of attention, he doesn't seem to have any spark of emotion in him. He certainly had a great deal of populist passion when he was on the campaign trail. And that, you could see, the old guy from the reality TV show. He knew how to put on a public display, and he seems to be most comfortable when he is in front of a rally of people who are cheering and adoring him. But when he has to stop and listen to others, it's almost like a turtle withdrawing in his shell. He is expressionless. He's virtually motionless. You can see him suffering through this. It's the same thing that happens when he is forced under certain special conditions where he has to read a speech from a teleprompter. He reads it okay, but there's no emotion, there's no passion. I'm getting through this because I have to. And there's almost a childlike quality about that, that he has to be the center, and if he's not really interested in what's going on around him. That, I think, is not just my observation. A lot of folks have said that, and I thought that was on display. He does not go out and give the kind of emotional speeches that can bring the country together because he would have to think about others. Imagine, look what Ronald Reagan did with a brilliant speech written by his Peggy Noonan, who was his speechwriter at the time, after the Challenger disaster, where the spacecraft blew up with the teacher on board and everything, and it was just a terrible tragedy for the country. And Ronald Reagan gave a speech that brought the country together and gave us a way to express our mourning. Donald Trump, in all of these mass shootings or in any tragedy that has befallen the country since he's been president, he can't do that. He has a difficult time showing up. And when he went around to the hurricane disasters, throwing paper towels out to the crowd down in Puerto Rico, just not engaging people, not empathizing with them. Yeah, so I think it's a real problem, and it's not the sign of a good leader who can bring people together when they need to be brought together.
Yeah. Do you think he's going to make the 4 years?
I have no idea. I really do believe that the information that we're seeing, this reminds me a lot about Watergate, not because it's the same case as Richard Nixon, but if anybody that lived through Watergate saw how slowly the unraveling of Nixon's administration took, because it was a due process, it was investigations, it took more than 2 years, and in the middle of that investigation, Nixon was reelected, so if this thing drags out past 2020, which I don't think it will, it's possible that even in the midst of a scandal, that Trump could rally the country. But I don't think. If he makes it through his one term, he'll be a one-term president. I can't see him getting reelected. But we may see him. We may see it short-circuited, not necessarily by impeachment. There's a lot of things that could happen. It could be a resignation. It could be unprecedented, but it's possible that a sitting president, can be indicted for a crime, and that would be through the Justice Department. It would take an exception to do that, because there's no real authority of Robert Mueller's investigation to actually indict the president. It's never been done, but it could be done, and there is a process for that, and an exception could be cited. And if that exception gets into proving money laundering with the Russians and other things that we're now learning about, I mean, Paul Manafort maybe have been promising people jobs in the White House for loans and maybe cash. Where does that go? Is Trump involved in that? There's members of Trump's family that could be indicted under some of these same procedures and problems. And would Trump, how would he react? Maybe the best thing for him would be to take a plea and just simply resign. So I don't know how that's going to play out. I just find it very disturbing that we're going to be going through very trying times. Trump is like a caged animal now. It's clear that his tweeting, especially since the revelation of the Russian indictment, where the 13 Russians and the 3 companies have been indicted. Not that we'll ever bring those Russians to justice in this country,
right?
Perhaps, but the fact that this gets out there in I read the whole thing, and it very clearly shows what they were doing and how they were doing it, and to suggest there was no Russian interference or no collusion is pretty hard for anybody to say when you look at the hard evidence that they've come up with. And all of this seems to be further confirmation of the very controversial Steele dossier that came out very early on, and that Trump has been railing against ever since, because he knows there's probably things that are in there that are true.
Well, and I don't know if this is something that you can comment on directly, but feel free if you can. It seems like there's a good 25-30% of the population that is immune to new information, to new data, and they think the sun rises and sets in Donald Trump's pants, or around him or something, and they watch Fox News only and exclusively because it's the only one that's fair and balanced. Is there hope for a change there, or are we kind of stuck with that?
I don't see anything that's going to change that, because it's like you said earlier, Phil. People get into their silos and into their little bubble worlds where they listen to what they want to listen to. I listen to Fox News too, because I want to know what they're saying. I want to understand their propaganda, and that is a propaganda channel, a Rupert Murdoch propaganda channel. And anybody that doesn't understand that has got to be one of those 35% that believes that the sun rises and sets on Donald Trump. And and Donald Trump watches it. We've got congressmen. We've got this one young congressman named Getz from Florida. He's a young guy. He's in his first term, but he's decided to be one of Trump's leading acolytes, and so he wants to get up early every morning at 5 o'clock and go on Fox as soon as they're on the air, because he knows that's when the president's watching. And so he goes on there and defends the president and says whatever outrageous thing needs to be said. He sounds just like Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the spokesperson for the president, and he's made quite a name for himself among alt-right conservatives because he's basically decided that this is the game he wants to play, and this is his road to fame. And certainly Fox News is the place to do that.
Well, and it just seems to me like this is like, people pleasing the dictator, that they're saying what he wants to hear so they get to survive, and they get a free car or an apartment or something. And am I making too much out of that, or is that kind of have that feel to it?
No, it does have that feel to it, and that one of the things I write about in my book is that meeting where the cabinet of the president's cabinet, where they all sat around and said how honored they were to serve him, and I couldn't believe it. That was so un-American for them to basically think of him as a king on a throne. And the last entry in my book is titled the greatest president of all and our first king, because of the way in which he is idolized and the way he wants to be idolized, and the way the cabinet has to deal with him. And people look what in Fire and Fury in that book, which was such a remarkable inside look at the dysfunction of the White House. It's clear that if you want to get anywhere with Donald Trump, you have to really butter him up and almost treat him like a child and just flatter the hell out of him, and then you might get to first base. But then he might agree with what you say and think, that's wonderful, we're going to do it just like you said after you flattered him. And then you leave the room, and then a half an hour later somebody else comes in and flatters him in a different way and gets him to change his mind. That happened to Chuck Schumer when they almost had a deal on the DACA, on the Dreamers, which is a really an ultimately sad case that we're playing fast and loose politics with these 800, 900,000 persons who are productive members of society and every bit as American as I am, as far as I'm concerned, and yet we're playing fast and loose with their entire futures. Some of them don't know any other country except the United States, and we're thinking of having police come in the middle of the night, knock on their door, and tell them they're out of here, unless they can find a way to fix that.
Yeah,
that's nasty.
It's a fraction at most 1%, but a fraction of a percent of the population. And like you said, they're producing, they're earning money, they're paying taxes, they're putting into the system. They might even be putting more into the system than a lot of Americans are doing, and we're terrorizing them. We're, like you said, just a case of a doctor who's been doing. He's been in the country 30, 40 years since he was 7. And they just scoop him up at night and say, you have to go back to Lebanon or Syria or Argentina, wherever it is, to a place you've probably not been to in 40 years just because. And that's very, very unsettling. And it seems like almost everything that he does is contrary to humanistic values of us taking care of each other. But I also see that kind of as an unfortunate segment of our population thinks the same way.
There's great fear, and of course Donald Trump is there's no question that he's a racist. The whole birther thing with Barack Obama, he did that for 5 years, and that wasn't even a dog whistle of racism. It was blatant, and there is a percentage of America of white America that is so fearful that white people are not going to be in the majority in another 20 or 30 years. Demographically, the country is changing. So the world ebbs and flows and changes, and people are migrating, and there's going to be even more migrations coming in the years ahead because of political unrest. We understand how to deal with that. We have rules and laws about political migrations, people fleeing civil wars and things like that. But we're going to have climate change migrants. We already have them in many parts of the world. And the United States is going to have to figure out what to do about that. There's no rules and regulations, no United Nations statutes that deal with climate migrants, people fleeing either desert as it creeps across their land, or people who are fleeing rising water. It's not just the United States. We're building this big wall along the Mexican border. But in India, between India and Bangladesh, there's a 2,000-mile very heavy barbed wire fence that's lit up like a Christmas tree at night. You can see it from outer space. Looks like a big scar on the landscape. And that is to keep the people from Bangladesh from getting into India as things deteriorate in the next 20 years in Bangladesh, which is already pretty bad. But the water's rising, the climate's changing, the monsoon seasons are coming at the wrong time, and while there's tons of water falling in the wrong places, they're having terrible water problems in India. People are sneaking water, have water trucks delivering water at night, and so people are going to be fleeing that, just like they did in Syria when they fled some of the growing desert in Syria, and they moved to the cities. And Assad would say Assad controlled the water rights. Again, it's like you're out in the desert. It's Lawrence of Arabia all over again. Whoever has the water hole controls everything, and so you had to get a permit from the Assad government to dig a well, and you got the people fleeing toward the cities, and he wouldn't give permits to people that weren't the right religious group, and so civil war breaks out. People are fleeing Syria. Muslims are. Germany has now taken in something like 3 million Muslims into Germany, and of course Donald Trump is trying to do everything he can to keep every single one out of the United States.
All right. Well, that's a real sad note, but.
Well, I'm not. The world is in trouble, and
you're right. It is in trouble, and I think we can fix a lot of it if we just put our minds to it and stop sticking our heads up our asses. But
well, we're doing that. I somehow think these folks that are following Trump are it's almost like a religious cult in the sense that you buy into a belief system. Because it does certain things for you, and it promises you certain things, and then you believe it even when it doesn't always deliver.
Yeah. And
even when you might say, well, if I really analyze this, that's not true at all. But you don't give up on the fact that he wants to keep immigrants out of America, and even though this is a nation of immigrants, and that he is all for people coming from Norway. He likes white people, and he doesn't like anybody from any darker skin.
Yeah, no doubts about that. Once again, the book is the Trump Tsunami, and it's available at least on Amazon and of course Kindle. It's only $5. Hopefully, you get $1 or something out of that. You can go get it there. I really wish it was an audio so I could listen to the whole thing. Maybe you can fix that in the near future.
I could think of doing an audio book. It's a paperback. It's a $15.95 paperback, or it's a $4.99 Kindle ebook. And I published it myself because I didn't think any publisher would want this kind of book, because it's not a book that reads like chapter to chapter. It is chronological and it does unfold. It's the kind of book you could pick up and turn it to any page and find something that you might be interested in, but you can also sit down and read it from cover to cover. And I did self-publish it. I used Amazon as the publisher. They have a thing called Kindle Direct Publishing, and it's doing pretty well. So it's not going to make the New York Times bestseller list, but I'm happy with the way it's going, and I'm already working on the sequel, and I expect the sequel to be even more dramatic because it might involve either an impeachment, an indictment, a resignation, a further unfolding of a very complicated legal matter, and I still want to see his income tax.
Well, I said even before he won the Republican nomination that there is money laundering, and I think that'll eventually be his undoing because it's easily trackable. Collusion, of course, I think is there, but how do you prove collusion? And at some point, fingers crossed, the average Republican, or at least Republican elected officials, turn against him. And we have now a historic record number of House members that are not running for re-election that would have been likely to win. So
yes, but a lot of those are in strong Republican districts yet, and the primary system is still controlled by, in many of these places, by Trumpites.
Yeah.
And so it's getting good people to. I'd like to see Republicans in some of these strong Republican districts that would run without being necessarily pro-Trump. But that's very difficult to do in these primaries, where if you don't toe the line, you don't even get to the ballot.
Yeah, it's going to be rough.
And so we do have our problems. But listen, if I have just a few seconds more, Phil, I just want to say that despite all this negative criticism of Trump and the sad state of our politics right now, I'm still one of those guys that when I go to Washington, D.C., and I see those buildings, I still get goosebumps. I love the years I worked in the House of Representatives. I love the Congress. I love the Constitution and these three branches of government. And one of the reasons I'm so upset is because I see this as the single threat to that system since the Civil War. And even during the Civil War, the Constitution was not threatened so much. It's just that the country was brutally murdering itself as fast as it could. 750,000 people dead over the issue of slavery. But we're in a bad place right now because of so many big issues coming down. But I still love the government. I want it to work. The reason it is working is because there's still an awful lot of civil servants and people in our intelligence agencies, in the Justice Department, despite the ones we hear about on the surface that are getting so much flack. And the military is doing its job. And this is a real test for us, but I think we're going to pull through it.
Well, maybe you can agree to come back on when Donald Trump is impeached. What do you think?
I'm one of the experts on impeachment. I've studied it all, and of course, here's the bottom line on that. We've never had a successful impeachment, so I'm not looking too forward to an impeachment. We've had impeachments, but we've never had convictions. Yeah. The only people who have been successfully impeached in our history have been a handful of federal judges. We've never successfully removed a president from office by the impeachment process, but we have impeached three of them: Andrew Johnson and Bill Clinton, and Nixon was not really impeached, but he resigned because they had voted to impeach him. Yeah. So we don't have a great track record on that one.
Well, very good. Ray-smock, again, thank you for being on the show. Is it okay if listeners find you on Facebook so they can get more of these updates?
Oh, absolutely. And anybody that wants to friend me on Facebook, I'm continuing to write these things. You can read the book free that way. There you go. Because I'm still I'm posting about every 3 or 4 days about what's going on. And as I say, you can just Google Trump Tsunami and it'll take you to Amazon. And if you're interested, I hope you do buy the book.
Great. Well, thanks again for being on the show. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, Phil.
Jesus had a tough life. Boy, I read about that guy. Jesus is the only guy that ever came back from the dead that didn't scare the fuck out of everybody, man. He's the only guy that ever crawled out of a grave where people didn't go, oh, I just saw some fucker crawl out of this grave. Jesus comes back. He doesn't get any pressure. No static. Nobody's upset. He climbs out. He's walking around. Nobody's upset. They can eat with him and everything. You know? It's like, isn't that guy dead? Yeah, but he's real stubborn, man. He won't accept it. Pass the butter. What are they staring at? Yeah. Yeah, I read it, folks. I read that book. He's on the cross. 30, 40 Christians standing around going, it's a shame that he has to die. And Jesus is going, well, maybe I wouldn't have to. Somebody get a ladder and a pair of pliers. I don't know if Jesus has actually spoken in an audible voice to anybody in about 2,000 years, folks. I think his last words may have been, oh, not the other one. Oh, you jerk. Oh. It may have been his last words. I'm not sure. Yeah, people say, you think Jesus is coming back? Sure. What's it been? 2,000 years? Boy, I sure don't want to dampen anybody's optimism here. It's only 2,000 fucking years. Yeah, he's coming back. He's going to do game shows. We're going to go, Jesus, this is your life. Remember this noise? All right, don't tell me. Give me a second. He's up in heaven right now. They're going, why don't you go back down to earth? Be a symbol of peace and love to the world. Help. And he's going, yeah, sure. Help, huh? Yeah, I'd like to help. Tell him I'll be there as soon as I can play the piano again. Thanks a lot. I mean, the only savior that can use his hand is a fucking whistle.
You're listening to The Phil Ferguson Show.
All right, as we wrap up, I've got something a little lighthearted for you. Recently, my son and I were at a event. We'll just call it that because it doesn't matter, the details. But we had some time where we were sitting at a table in a place that served little drinks. And him and I got to talking, and he shared with me one of his favorite jokes. It's a knock-knock joke. And I thought, just something totally different. I don't think I've done this before. I figured I'd share this joke with you. So prepare yourself just to take a moment, pause what you're doing, focus with me for a minute. I want to share this knock-knock joke with you. And of course, the story of what happens. But before I can tell you what happened afterwards, I have to actually tell you the joke. So I need you to be ready and be prepared for a knock-knock joke. And I want you to actually participate if you can. I mean, if you're driving or you're at work and you can't say anything out loud because it would be weird because you're listening to a podcast, I understand. You get a pass. But if you can, have a little fun with it. So here's how it goes. This is a new knock-knock joke, and I think it's pretty funny. I think you're going to like it. But I need you to start, so go ahead. And hopefully you said knock-knock, and then I say, who's there? It creates you victimize, I guess, the person who starts it because they're not prepared with a answer to who's there because they're not thinking of a knock-knock joke. So you've thrown them off this normal sequence. And so there were a few people sitting around this table with us, and my son did that to me. And he goes, okay, Dad, you go ahead and start. And I go, all right, knock, knock. And my son goes, who's there? And I'm stuck. I mean, yes, I know knock-knock jokes, but none of them are coming to me at that moment. And so I realized that I'd been trapped. And so I just go, fuck you. And he busts up laughing. I bust up laughing. A few other people around the table start laughing. And there was this young lady there that was a friend of a friend, and she's maybe 25, 30. And so she's like, how did that go again? How did that go again? I go, okay, well, let's practice. And I said, you go ahead and start. And she goes, knock, knock. And I go, who's there? And she doesn't know what to say. And I go, see? And she goes, I don't get it. Why is that funny? I go, it's funny to everybody but you, because you're the one who's stuck and you don't know what to say. And she's like, oh, okay. And a little later, someone else comes by that she knows a little bit. And I said, hey, you could practice your new joke. And she's like, I'm really not good at telling jokes. And I said, oh, no, I think, we practice it. I think you've got this. I think you can do it. I think it's going to be great. And so she turns to this person and she goes, knock, knock. And the other person goes, who's there? And she goes, fuck you. And my son and I completely lost our shit because she took what we did as being the joke when I was just up mad at my son for having tracked me. And I said, fuck you to him because he tricked me with the joke, which to us was funny because that's, we can talk that way to each other. But she just brought up another person and didn't have them start the joke. She started the joke by saying knock, knock. And they said, who's there? And then she said, fuck you. And my son and I completely lost it. And thankfully, we were not in the middle of drinking anything because we would have spit it all over the table. Anyway, I just was remembering that from a week ago, and that was hysterical. We cracked us up. And I wanted to do something kind of fun because now I'm going to rant a little bit. I've recently noticed, well, I haven't noticed it in the past, but it seems to be becoming more frequent. We have to be careful of our bubbles. We have to be careful of, the things we say out loud. Sometimes we get a little carried away. We get a little isolated. And it's an unfortunate downside of the availability to talk to anybody at any time that it's very easy to exclude people that disagree with us. And so I've recently been hearing things, people saying things like, every member of the NRA thinks this. Every Christian thinks this. Every liberal thinks this. Everyone who voted for Trump thinks this. Everyone who voted for candidate X thinks that. As soon as you start a statement with everyone thinks, you're probably wrong. And maybe just now I overgeneralized. So I put in my hedge word, probably, maybe possibly, maybe you're not. But think about it a little bit. I mean, maybe speak a little slower and think a little harder. It's just kind of something that I've noticed. It started to frustrate me, and it makes me want to go meet new, different people that I disagree with just to make sure that I have a better grip on reality. Because if you surround yourself with people that only agree with you, you can start to convince each other that people outside of your group believe, do, act in certain ways that aren't true. One of the things that I heard, just as an example, and in case this person listens to the show, please forgive me. It's what popped into my head. I don't mean to pick on you. But the phrase came up, and I'm paraphrasing it and I may have it wrong. So again, forgive me. Everyone that goes hunting gets off on killing animals. And that's just simply not true. There's a lot of reasons people hunt. I don't want to hunt because, quite frankly, I don't want to sit up in a tree for a couple of days waiting for a deer to come by. I know there's more to it, and there's nuance, and there's skill levels, and there's equipment, and all kinds of things that go with it. That's kind of my point. I don't necessarily understand it. Now, you might disagree with hunting from the grounds of purely killing an animal that's not necessary, which, again, could be debated because if you don't restrict deer populations, maybe. But there's nuance to it. There's arguments that can be made on both sides, and you can think that the other person is wrong, but as soon as you say every hunter or every person in this subgroup does something or thinks something, there's a good chance that you're at least partially wrong. One of the other phrases I heard is every Christian thinks X. Well, I've done this a long time. I've been an activist for like 12 plus years, and every Christian doesn't think X. I've met Christians that don't accept the divinity of Jesus Christ. I'm not sure if that qualifies as being a Christian in my head, but it qualified for them. So you can't you can't just assume for other people. If you want to know what someone thinks, ask them. If you want to know what someone believes, ask them, talk to them. And maybe we all need to do that a little bit more. And I think that might even include me. So I don't know. It was just something that was kind of bugging me. So I wanted to share that before I do a couple of really, really positive reviews. So, a little balance in my life, I guess, myself. Oh, I almost forgot. It's kind of a weird thing. I've received a few emails and or Facebook messages in the last week or two. People asking me to stop making so many corrections to myself. I'm undermining my own credibility. I think my short answer to that is fuck off. I make mistakes, and sometimes I make them more frequently than others. I'm talking about a lot of complicated things, things that many people don't understand. I think they should understand them better, but it is complicated. And I mean, even earlier in this episode, I was talking about maybe a correction or adjustment on what I said with Acorns. I think it's critically important that, kind of going with my little rant here, I think maybe this is part of why that came to me. I have to be willing to acknowledge that I make mistakes. And I think it's important to cover them on the show. If that really bothers you, I guess the only thing I've got for you is stop listening to the show. If it's a little nuanced detail, maybe I skip over it and I go on with my life. But if I misstate something or if I have something wrong, and I joke about the listeners telling me this, but I actually do want to know. And if I think it's material enough, I will cover it and I will correct it because I want the show to be the most accurate over time, not to claim that I had everything right in show X. So anyway, that's a little aside. On iTunes, a couple of reviews here. The first one's nice and short. The other one's even not even that long, but the first one's nice and short. MotoGP fan Randy, and it says 1.5 hours is almost long enough. I really appreciate and enjoy the additional content after the interviews. Hey, that's now. He goes on. Personally, 2 hours is just about right. Well, the funny thing is, I actually fantasize that I can keep this under an hour, but that often doesn't happen. Just like the interview today, I couldn't figure out where it would make sense to cut ray-smock short. We were talking about so much fun and important stuff, and I'm enjoying it. And actually, that's the primary motivation for the show. I'm doing what I like, and if you happen to like it, I'm delighted. If you don't like it, there's a lot of other podcasts. Go listen to those. Anyway, more ranting. Forgive me. Another review from, Widgeon55. Just say it like I know what I'm saying. Widgeon55 says here, I'm fairly new to the show, but as a longtime atheist, I thoroughly enjoy the commentary and guests. Keep up the good work. As a retired person, I very much appreciate the financial insights as well. By the way, I'm not tired of hearing about Bitcoin. As a friend of mine who's a religious Bitcoin fanatic recently moved all of his money into it, and he never met a conspiracy theory he didn't love. I'm worried that he will reset to zero. And so it's one of those things I even cautioned myself a few weeks ago to not get too excited about Bitcoin going down because Bitcoin might at some point go back up. And I haven't checked in the last couple of days, but it has rebounded some. And it's not that I know if and or when Bitcoin's going to go up or down. There's a couple of things. One, I don't fully understand it, and that's even after some research. And of course, I had listeners tell me I had everything wrong, but whatever. I don't fully understand it. I have a system for making money that I'm comfortable with and competent with, and it's done very well for me, and I expect, hopefully correctly, that it will continue to do so for many years to come. Bitcoin is very volatile, so I don't fully understand it. It's very volatile. I don't like investments that swing like that on a regular basis. And in the end, I am worried that its residual value, the ending value, has a good chance of being dramatically lower than what it is today. And I just know from experience, having been in investments for long enough, that whenever I hear things like, these are new rules, these are new times, the old game doesn't matter, so far, most of the time, they're wrong. And like with .com, when they would say profits don't matter. Well, apparently they did eventually. And companies that weren't making money went bankrupt or had to eventually figure out a way to make money. So sometimes things come around and go around. Again, I appreciate the reviews. Thank you so much for the 2 people that left me iTunes reviews. If you listen to the podcast, even if it's not on iTunes, I would greatly appreciate you going to iTunes and leaving a review. The other place is, of course, Stitcher has reviews. I appreciate reviews on either location, so please feel free to do that. And I'm pretty sure I actually haven't checked with anyone at American Atheists, but February ends my little matching thing, and I think 2 weeks ago, maybe 2.5 weeks ago, because I'm running behind. We were only a few people away from the limit, so I'm going to double check on that, but I'm pretty sure I now have to write a check for $6,000, and something close to 200 new members are going to be an American Atheists, and hopefully a good chunk of them stay year after year, and maybe even some of them will go to the conference. In a couple of weeks, March 17th, I will be in Nashville for the Nashville Nuns Conference. And then 2 weeks after that, I will be in Oklahoma City for the American Atheist Conference. I hope to see you at one or both of those events. If you know of an event in your area, or you know someone who's planning an event or running an event and they'd like to come on the show and talk about it, please have them contact me. That's phil@polarisfinancialplanning.com, and I'd be happy to have them on the show to promote it. So I'll just wrap up with that, and I appreciate your time and effort. And I expect to see you at an upcoming conference. Until then, ciao.